Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to video game news. Today is July 20th, 2026, Monday. We'll scroll down the 24-hour peak concurrent chart and do a little bit of warm-up, then jump into the video game news. I don't really have even that much to say over the weekend. Inherently, I've been sleeping most of the day away, so it definitely feels like I accomplish less if I'm waking up at 5 in the evening and then staying awake till 5 in the morning compared to waking up at 5 in the morning and then going to sleep at, let's face it, it probably would be closer to 10 in the evening in the other way. But yeah, there's very little I've been doing other than a little bit of follow-us cleanup still, and I switched from working on the news script replacement to replace my news macros to rewriting the slideshow script that is more of a side project. I thought that was going to go a little bit smoother and a little bit faster over the weekend, and it really didn't go as smooth as I'd like. I'm still running into some weirdness, and frankly, there was just a lot of rewriting of things. By rewriting this smaller script, I am learning and teaching myself better ways to rewrite the news script, which I have made a little bit of progress on that too. So, the current state of the news script is probably further along than I think. I got something really in my throat today. Excuse me. But yeah, it's probably further along than I think, but there definitely is a possibility of things popping up and surprising me, or things just being revealing a better way to do things. And that's why it kind of makes sense to jump over to another project. That is one of the weird things about programming when being employed to program versus programming and being like an independent contractor who can choose what to work on when. And I don't think that's unique even to particularly programming. I think most human beings would do well if they jumped in between projects a lot more and had a little bit more control on what they were told to work on, or what they chose to work on, instead of just being told to work on something. Familiarity breeds not only contempt, but it doesn't breed typically new ideas, and it doesn't breed consistent accuracy. Whereas, let's face it, most jobs are the same thing over and over again in a lot of factory line assembly work type mentality jobs. And that certainly doesn't help with creative things. But yeah, if you're working at a McDonald's, you're supposed to make the burgers exactly the same every single time, and you tend not to switch between being on the grill versus being up front dealing with the people. We certainly had a job where it literally was the exact same thing repeated, usually every single minute for 8 hours. Just absolutely mind-numbingly insane repetition. And yeah, that feels imprisoning, for lack of a better term. Let's look at the most wishlist games. But yeah, right now on the slideshow I have one thing that's just not working and I just don't know why, and I have maybe a couple other things to work on, just to finish and polish up. Pretty much all of the code has been rewritten at this point. And there is definitely some HTML aspects there that probably need improvement too. And that one of the things I'm really struggling to find and figure out is just how to get the input bar to be big enough to go across the entire screen. It doesn't want to really be that large. Which, yeah. I need, that's less of a JavaScript thing. It's not a JavaScript thing, and it really is just a HTML CSS thing. But it is something I would like to get it to work. And what's funny about this is here we have included in slideshow, and the slideshow is actually enabled. It's not supposed to be. It's not enabled. So I have no idea why that's open, why that's there. That's not my slideshow thing either. Some other code must exist in one of these other things. But like none of this is enabled. I'm gonna have to figure out what went weird there. So yeah, over the weekend I played maybe an hour of Paper Mario 1000 Year Door. Just like the very beginning of that. And that was very late last night as I was going to sleep. Been watching this show on Prime Video called Extinct. It's fine. It's a little weird that it's rated 3 out of 5 stars. There aren't a lot of people in it, and I think that kind of helps. Maybe there's a problem that all the people you do see in it are eventually revealed to have pretty close connections to each other, both in their previous lives and their current lives. But yeah, it's set in the future, in the sci-fi futuristic future that is pretty post-apocalyptic, so it doesn't really do a lot of crazy special effects, and weirdly it does some flashbacks where it's doing more special effects in the flashbacks, and then it kind of just ends, but it gives you a successful enough ending. The premise being that the human race went extinct and there are these nanobots, for lack of a better term, that are recreating humans, and they had scanned the brain states of people's before they had died, and they're uploading those brains to these new bodies, and they're trying to bring back the human race from extinction. It perhaps would have been better if there was more challenges there, because they really introduced one enemy early on, and that is the only enemy early on. Whereas in retrospect, I imagine if you wanted to make a show like that, it would make a lot of sense to say that there was 5 things that happened to cause the extinction of the human race, not just that straight up aliens attacked and killed them all, which is the general premise. But yeah, I've seen a lot worse garbage that would deserve 3 out of 5, in my opinion. And I think it probably does go to show that what people who review sci-fi on Prime Video, at least, review it as is probably not that niche sci-fi audience that should be reviewing sci-fi things, and probably a more generic audience that is thinking, when they think sci-fi, more Star Wars, big spectacle type things. Yeah. And that is an interesting thought I just had, as far as if you review a TV show on Prime Video through Amazon.com, does that review then turn to the Prime Video interface on the TV? It probably should, but yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if it is not all unified, and I wouldn't really be surprised if the number of ratings are in the single digits for a lot of shows. I don't recall if I even watched anything else, but in fairness, also, about halfway through yesterday, I started to feel this pain in my knee, and I don't recall hitting my knee anytime recently, but I do recall maybe a couple days ago I hit it as I was swinging down my dishwasher, and so I might just be having this delayed reaction bruise. I hope that's all it is. But yeah, I kept standing up and going to the bathroom and going, why is there pain in my knee? I just don't remember hitting it. But yeah, it definitely feels like it's a subdermal bruise type thing, not anything worse. Of course, as soon as your knees go, that's when a lot of stuff goes, as far as your ability to even do basic walking. I looked at my electricity company, and the new offerings for electricity are terrible. The prices are super high, and to get a rate like what I had before, where you get a bill credit if you use over 1,000 kilowatts, the credit now is $150 instead of $100, which you would think bigger number means better, but actually in this case it means worse, because that means if you are at 999 kilowatt hours at the end of the month, you've just lost $150 in bill credits, and your actual consumption charge is going to go way up by 10-15 cents per kilowatt hour, which means I'm going to have to really be on the ball and plug in space heaters and make sure that on the coldest of months, when the air conditioner is not running at all, electricity is getting used, which is a weird situation to certainly be in, but it is the situation I find myself in. The other thought is a much more expensive thought, which would be to get a free nights and weekends planned, and or a free days plan. Probably a free days plan, and then have a battery backup system that is charging up during the day and powering throughout the whole night, which that would have to be a pretty powerful 3-phase auto transfer switch and battery setup. So you're looking potentially anywhere from a couple thousand to $10,000, probably closer to $10,000, and that's not including or even thinking about adding solar, which, yeah, a lot of that stuff probably needs to be done under the table, because if they know you have batteries and you have a free days plan, they're probably going to try and screw you on that, and it doesn't really account for the general fees of just being a customer. in a weird way, since I now need to use more electricity when it switches over. Moving over from an electric dryer to a gas dryer just makes that much more difficult. Although a clothes dryer was never really a consistent source of energy usage at all. And, you know, the Tuya smart system and the devices I have right now don't really monitor total usage well enough for me to balance anything out. But I certainly can adjust things on the fly quite a bit. But yeah, it really comes down to running HEPA filters 24/7 to run up electricity and running dehumidifiers 24/7 in the winter months. I suppose fan on my air conditioner could also be set to constantly run during the winter months, and that might use a lot of electricity too. I'm still right in the summer months though. Yes, I keep hoping, and these plans really don't tend to offer more than 12-month contracts. The hoping is that electricity would go down, but the odds of that seem to be pretty low for at least the next year. Yeah. As far as solar goes, the smartest move would probably be for me to build a solar pergola that only had 2,000 watts at most on it, and then that would be probably some kind of illegal plug-in solar in my area, since my area is not one of the couple of states that actually allows plug-in solar. Yeah. There was something as I was watching a video about a solar pergola, instead of putting in solar panels on the roof, in the idea that because the back side of the pergola is open air, it's much cooler. Typically it seems to drive the efficiency back up by 5 to 10%, which I did have a thought that if you're going to put roof mount solar panels, it may very well, particularly if they're not bifacial solar panels, it typically would be helpful to run like cold water from your main water in behind that into a water heater, cooling your solar panels and giving you free hot water. There's really no system to do that. That would be very much a do-it-yourself project. And honestly, it might very well be the need necessary to do it from a transfer method where you have a closed loop of water going behind the solar panels, going into like a barrel of clean water, heating that clean water, and then that clean water going to a water heater. It might just be a little bit safer to do it that way, even though you will get some losses in that. And it might very well be that it's necessary because the water that would be cooling the back of a solar panel might be 140, 160 degrees, just way too hot. Yeah, 5 to 15% efficiency doesn't sound like a lot, but it is a decent amount to lose. And it certainly also highlights where like installing bifacial panels on the roof makes no sense, or installing panels on the roof in general tends not to make a huge amount of sense. I'm still playing Pokemon TCG Pocket. I actually went through the process of making an Everyday Wonders deck that actually put some thought into, and weirdly, I don't know if this is the only strategy that comes with that expansion, but the only strategy I found was to go with Puppy Pile. So I made an entire deck that is about getting as many Pokemon that have Puppy Pile as their attack, which they're all puppies, dogs. And Puppy Pile does 20 damage for every single dog card on the field or in your hand that you reveal to the opponent, which with Lucky Egg, which draws cards up to 5, and Puppy Loving Girl giving you all the puppies in the next 4 cards that you would have drawn, it gives you a decent amount of puppies, so you're up to 140, 160 damage near the end of a game. On top of which I put Bounded Arena in because the puppies are of different character classes, like electricity, water, earth, fighting, things like that. So it is a very diverse deck too, in that you can decide that this deck is that you're fighting is a bunch of water Pokemon, so you're going to put your focus on the electricity puppy, and Bounded Arena changes their weakness from being plus 20 damage to 2 times damage. So if you're doing 120 damage with the electricity puppy to a water Pokemon, then you're doing 240 damage, which is a massive amount of damage for Pokemon TCG Pocket. But it's still not really game breaking. Like, there just aren't enough cards, and they don't do enough in Pokemon to get to that Magic the Gathering, Yu-Gi-Oh level of game-breaking synergy things. And puppies in general are fairly balanced in that they have low enough health that they can be one-turn killed. Still playing Memento Mori. Decided to put a little bit more progress into that as far as some of the things I've been neglecting. Where's Memento Mori? It's way down here in the 59th spot. I did see a new YouTube creator, new to me, that talked about, I think, the first animator that made the characters for Destiny Child is working on a new mobile game, not with Shift Up though, so yeah. That I may try to keep an eye on that game to see if it even comes out in the West. It is not out yet, I don't believe. Something like MSRI or something is like the name of it. Or maybe that's just the initials of it. YouTube is weird again, in that the people in the YouTube Partner Program are being given this option for making their playlist into shows and brand connection offers where you can put yourself up for sale to do advertising. And they've fairly changed the emphasis on shorts now, in that now shorts are really being pushed as a thing that you do as a commercial to push people to longer form videos. No longer are they treating shorts like it's its own separate thing, which is definitely how they sold it originally, that it was just going to be a whole new thing for a whole new different type of creator. There was a story that popped up on Reddit a couple times of some massive AI purge happening on YouTube, and that they've found a bunch of fake channels that promote each other and things like that and purge that. But even the article that was claiming this was written in AI, so it's AI reporting on AI, and I doubt too much of that is believable. And frankly, if it was true, it would come out directly from YouTube, not just in some kind of article. Undoubtedly, there probably have been some purges, and there constantly will be, but I don't think that they are going to do a great job of picking and choosing what kind of AIs they want to get rid of versus their own AIs that they want to keep. Because yes, YouTube Shorts in particular are pushing a lot of their own Google Gemini type AI stuff. Yeah, haven't been playing any games. Yeah, I definitely am switching more often in the past couple of years to just programming mode instead of video game mode. That is perhaps a problem, perhaps not. Definitely if I just had more things scheduled far enough ahead. Seen a couple more YouTubers talk about having a Steam machine for a week and generally saying we like it. We hate the price, but we like it kind of as a console. They're calling it a 1440p machine, which I am starting to wonder a little bit more if it is getting to the point where I should, as a content creator, start thinking about recording in 1440p instead of 1080p. Certainly it would help if I finish building my new computer, and that might even help use more electricity if I just have one more computer running all the time. Lost the Forgotten Relic. I want to look at that one. Although it's kind of pointless to look at things when it's just out. There is definitely getting to a point where both with like my 4K UHD Blu-rays and DVDs and just video gaming in particular, my eyesight maybe is not good enough to really appreciate 1440p. But then again, it is also just kind of a different type of source. Like there still is very rarely a case where video games are uniquely designed for you to need that extra resolution. And that would be mostly PC games. It'd be exclusively PC games, let's face it, and it would very much be the assumption that you have a computer monitor right in front of your face, less than a foot away. Where it's very different content to have like a 4K UHD movie that you are sitting 10 feet away from. Yeah, so just kind of a different kind of visual format here. Alright, let's keep on going. I started late today, so I do want to kind of rush through everything today and move on. And in this case, we did manage to put that on the wish list. This is taking the VR games, the VR MOS games, and re-releasing them years later in a way that people without VR can actually play them. And MOS, I think, is one of the few games that actually did deserve to be played. Although even in this, the screenshot's not really showing you a lot, and it definitely shows that they probably had to work fairly hard to convert VR back to non-VR. MOS is definitely one of those games that was too early to market and didn't have that ability to make a 2D game and a 3D game at the same time that would make sense. And yeah, I really don't even have anything to say about Steam Deck Refurb. I did see an interview with one of the creators of Binding of Isaac Rebirth, and he did admittedly say that like one of his previous games, he didn't go out and do any press interviews and didn't really push the game and advertise it, and that really hurt it with his partner making the game, which, yeah, I will chalk that up to somebody being stupid and not being malicious, but inherently the Hollywood thing of you have to go do press, you have to cooperate here, or you're never going to get any work again, and you have to promote even a terrible movie, really is going to apply to any kind of commercial video game development and promotion too, is that while it is in that sales window, at least that launch window, you need to be out there doing press and promoting it as much as possible. And there's actually even more of a need in my mind for developers to go out and talk about their games and promote it than actors. Notably, people who did voice acting on games are not being held to that standard at the moment to go out and do press for video games or promote video games they've worked in. It is interesting, Eugenics and Binding of Isaac, both from the same creator, in the top 100 games being played on Steam. In this interview, you also what's this game? He also talked about some of the games he was playing, which are fairly small indie games, some of which I hadn't even heard of, which, yeah, there is very noticeably a case where on this top list there's less than average first-person shooter style games, generic games that we've seen done over and over again. And as I guess the summer break for kids out of school is approaching, that might also cover why there's a decent number of new games on this list. It is noticeable that this list this week is fairly different from what we've been seeing before, and Power World is in the #1 spot. Which, yeah, for $20, that's not a terrible time to buy it, I would imagine. One of the things about the fall list cleanup, though, I have to say, is that I'm still thinking, not that much, on whether something actually deserves to go to the wish list or not. When there is a point that I am going to the follow list cleanup, it's usually when I'm just about ready to get up and leave from the computer and take a break, so I kind of rush to it, and I'm not mentally energized enough to look at a game and evaluate it. It's easy to evaluate games that are bad, particularly if it just has AI in it or something. Apparently I have seen this game, but boy do I not recognize it. But it is a lot harder to not evaluate games, or to evaluate games that are good. Alright, well, that's going to bring us to the Video Games Chronicle articles, I believe. Eventually. Let's see. This is that co-op game, although it does seem to be claiming it has single player. So I'll put this on the follow list. An extremely hard game, which just was announced, but I guess it just didn't have a Steam page until this point. Avatar: The Last Airbender is not quite out yet. Due to Ducky, it's not out yet. Dino Blade, I'll put that on the follow list. Alright, and we don't have that many Video Games Chronicle news articles, but that may very well just be a case of the weekend and not being that much that happened this weekend. So here we have something that probably needs to be talked about a lot more in the game industry and industries in particular. Although I would imagine alcoholism isn't the only problem in the game industry. I wouldn't be surprised if there is a decent amount of people who are also doing cocaine because of the long hours. And arguably, I would say there's maybe not enough people doing LSD and magic mushrooms or ayahuasca or something like that, salvia, things that might take your mind on a wilder trip, whereas alcohol is really just going to take you in a depressive blackout state, and cocaine is going to take you to a wild manic state. I don't think either one of those really helps with your creativity. And certainly, even if something did help with your creativity, it then becomes incredibly difficult to get off of a drug if you're a creative person, because your first thought is going to be that you're not going to be as creative when you're off that drug. And certainly that has left a lot of stand-up comedians doing coke and thinking that that was what they needed to be funny. But yeah, Cliff Bleszinski opens up about addiction recovery and his hope to return to games. The Gears of War designer says his drinking led to a seizure and he's now focused on his health. Okay. So, it is extremely cynical to doubt sincerity here, but I would severely say I don't think Cliff Bleszinski needs to come back to the game industry. I don't think he's ever really been that helpful to the game industry, and he has left and come so many times. And if I was going to be extremely cynical, I would say this may very well, while I suspect all of it is true, just be a way in which he's trying to grift his way back into the spotlight and back into the game industry, for which he really should not return. In a lot of ways, Cliff Bleszinski is one of the archetypes, if not an archetype, at least the models of the gamer bro type person. And Gears of War is definitely a gamer bro thought type of game. Not to say that I wouldn't play Gears of War, but it is definitely something trying to create a new audience that they eventually did create in Xbox with Halo and Gears of War. But yeah, I don't think there's a lot more to say there. I almost wonder if this bracelet might be some kind of recovery bracelet or Kabbalah thing, but yeah, I don't recognize it. But yeah, I would say anybody that calls themselves a functioning alcoholic is not fully embracing the fact that you're not really functioning if you're an alcoholic, and you're not fully functioning if you're under the influence of alcohol ever. But then he does say he became a non-functioning alcoholic. there is probably way too much drinking in the game industry, and video game journalism often is part of that or encourages that. If you look back at some of the events and the going to E3 type events, there is a lot of drinking happening, if not on the floor show, in the rooms late at night. All I guess I can really say here is that while I do believe him, I also don't think it would be healthy for him, and I definitely don't think it would be healthy for the game industry for him to come back into any role, whether it's interviews or working in the game industry. He was certainly one of these people, Cliffy B, that was taking a lot of credit and not giving a lot of credit to other people, which was also a big problem there too. Instead, very often you would have these avatars being created like they were genius creators when really they weren't. Which certainly that was something I was feeling when I finished Zelda Ocarina of Ages. That game, I don't know if I talked about it, it's just awful. It's probably the worst Zelda game. But then you also have Seasons, which is pretty much, I think, going to be the same game, Pokemon style. But yeah, lots and lots of things you cannot get unless you connect to the other game. An entire dungeon you can't access unless you connect to the other game. Friendship rings being traded where you can't collect all the rings. Not that it seemed like the rings did anything. There's a whole point where you bump into this flying witch Maple. Apparently you were supposed to always let her bump into you because she would drop rings, and then you're supposed to pick up the rings, and that was one of the ways you were supposed to collect rings. I just always avoided her so she wouldn't bump into me because she would steal items from me. But yeah, you just don't get the Master Sword. You don't get the Mirrored Shield. Yeah, it is a really, really bad Zelda game. And there are definitely points where I would not have been able to beat the game had I not just made save states over and over again. And that is one of the things that's reminding me, is that certainly there is a lot of old games that you really are unlikely to beat unless you cheat one way or the other. And that was true even in the old days with like Game Gear, Game Genie. Yeah, Game Genie, not Game Gear. Codes and devices. And certainly, it's also worth pointing out that Ocarina of Time had already come out like the year before Oracle of Seasons did. And so you had this Nintendo 64 3D Zelda game that was great. And after that, you have this Game Boy Color game that is completely different and pretty awful. And I assume they were developed in parallel too, so it could have easily been the case that they would have come out before instead of after. But yeah, it's gonna kind of suck to potentially try and play Seasons and it be the same game and still the same problems. As far as I can tell, there is no way to really connect a like Steam Deck emulating a Game Boy Colored game to even another Steam Deck emulating another Game Boy Colored game. It'd be nice if that was the case, but I think the closest thing that might exist is network connecting over the internet, not just plugging in some weird USB-C to USB-C plug to choose Steam Decks. Oh, I think over this weekend I also spent probably 2 or 3 hours I shouldn't have looking at the Dolphin emulator, which is not perfect on the Steam Deck, certainly, to see if it could save states and load states, and it can, but it doesn't have an option to automatically do it, which is weird. So unlike everything else built into Emulation Station, it's not capable of you hitting the exit button and then it saving the state before exiting, and then when you launch it again it just loads the state. So yeah, I was messing with like button configurations, and I'm not sure I made any real progress there. And yeah, the integration of emulation station, which maybe now is just completely replaced with Batocera, some version of emulation station or some other launcher, seems to really stop because the Raspberry Pi and RetroArch itself could never really run Dolphin to run GameCube games. Which, in fairness, even on the Steam Deck, there are definitely glitches. It's playable, but not perfect. Let's see, Final Fantasy X gets a 25th anniversary trailer ahead of X and X2 HD remasters coming to Switch this week. Owners of the Switch version won't be able to update to the Switch 2 port. Okay. I'm not sure if X and X2 are even that well remembered at this point. It does feel to me like, well, they may very well try to remind people of X and maybe 13 or 12. It's either 12 or 13. I think the success of Final Fantasy VII may really be establishing that in people's minds the only Final Fantasy that is still relevant very possibly is the 7 reboot trilogy. Looking at this trailer, looking at these characters, none of them feel particularly memorable. And they all feel oddly Japanese or Asian in their dress and their style. Which I would suspect the Western world is even less interested in playing a Final Fantasy game where it starts to feel more like a JRPG than it already does as the definitive JRPG. That's a weird way to phrase that, but yeah, more Asian. Yeah, there is something kind of unique about 7 in particular, in that none of those characters really scream like they're in an Asian world or that they are Asian characters. Yeah, and some of these characters might be really loved, so it might make a sense that in the 7 reboot at the end, they try to bring in some of these characters from an alternate dimension for some future games, but I imagine they won't. I imagine they're just going to try and set more Final Fantasy games in different worlds and different stories. Yeah. Of course, one of the less successful Final Fantasies recently also tried to set it in kind of this medieval fantasy world, and that was fairly well rejected too. Like, I think Final Fantasy does have this air of a little bit of magical fantasy and a lot of sci-fi steampunk type stuff from 7, and that's, I think, what people are looking for, which is very easy, I imagine, for Japanese people to be confused by that when you have the first 6 Final Fantasy games being very much fantasy worlds only. Moving on, we have a quote here: "We are committed to making this clearer. In Xbox execs, it's not obvious to players which games will be exclusive. Xbox is reportedly deciding whether some of the upcoming games will be multi-platform." Some of these decisions had been made, I suspect, and may very well be getting remade. But yeah, we shall see. According to this picture here, Clockwork Revolution will be an Xbox console exclusive. I didn't know that they actually owned the company that was making Clockwork Revolution. It is definitely something that feels like they're making BioShock 20 years later, and probably 18 years too late with Clockwork Revolution. But weirdly, they can get it out before Judas comes out, or before BioShock 4 comes out, then that might still work. Although at any point, a surprise release of BioShock 4 or Judas could come out and really wreck Clockwork Revolution. And weirdly, it's likely that 2 or 3 of those games will all come out within a few months of each other. I would generally assume that there is going to be a bunch more exclusives, as that is seemingly the last card that Xbox can play. Either they do a whole bunch of exclusives to push hardware usage now and for the Project Helix, or they get out of the console making business altogether and they just become a publisher. Which, yeah, it's kind of weird to be a publisher and own so many companies outright. Let's see, the next Video Games Chronicle article says EA Sports FC has correctly predicted the FIFA World Cup winner for the 5th time in a row. World Cup has happened and it is over now, so I imagine it'll just be a few more days of people talking about the World Cup. And then as far as people in the United States, that'll be the end of that. It definitely seems to be the case that the World Cup caught a lot of people's attention, but I don't know that it really led to a lot of new excitement around playing any kind of soccer games, video game wise. I do think there probably is a pretty big split between people who like soccer and can go out and just play it themselves, since it is a very easy game to play. All you need is a ball and a field, really, and some amount of people you can really play by yourself, compared to football, which takes a little bit more, baseball takes a lot more, hockey takes a lot more. So yeah, around the world there's still a lot of people playing football / soccer instead of playing it in the virtual space of video games. And honestly, I don't know if there's a ton of people who are super soccer fans that also want to play it in video game form instead of just play it themselves or watch other people play it. I mean, you already spend a ton of time potentially watching other people play soccer if you're a soccer fan, so yeah. I think the same is probably true for American football too, is that it's probably, of the audience that still exists that watches American football, I don't think they tend to spend a lot of time playing video game football either. It seems like it's a weird niche audience of that bigger audience. Moving on, Marathon's director confirms he's quit Bungie 4 months after launch. Joe Ziegler exits after a tough month for Bungie, which saw significant layoffs. This is really just a case of the disenfranchisement / prestige that a director / manager level employee can do, saying he quit when he very possibly was asked to quit and leave, versus people being laid off and giving no warning or real choice in the matter, or choice in the timing of the matter at least. I don't recognize Joe Ziegler. I really don't know a ton about Marathon either, but I suspect neither are particularly impressive to me. But yeah, we will, I think, mark this as perhaps the beginning of seeing managers who were asked to leave possibly 4 months ago actually leaving. Which, yeah, for a manager it might very well be that they have 4 months of saved up vacation time. That he's just sitting on and using up before quitting. And does it really hurt somebody's career at a manager director level to say he's quit? Not really. Particularly since the game came out, that would be the only black mark potentially in my mind, is if somebody quit before a game came out. He almost certainly got his name in the credits of the game. He almost certainly got overpaid, or paid what he was expecting to get paid at least. So yeah, it's certainly going to be less difficult for him to get a new job if he needs to get a new job. Also, he may very well be rich enough to just go form his own company, which at some level, perhaps there is just a need for more people in middle management and even lower management to leave companies and go start their own companies, and have a whole bunch of smaller companies in the video game industry instead of what often happens in every other industry, which is you just have duopolies, triopolies, where there's 3 big companies that run everything. Just enough companies to avoid technically being a monopoly, even if they are mostly working behind the scenes together. And then our last Video Games Chronicle article for today is Claire Obscure star Jennifer English exits Tides of Annihilation over health concerns. The Baldur's Gate 3 actress will no longer star in Tides of Annihilation. Could be health concerns for real, could very well be some other thing that is just not wanting to be connected with the projects. Yeah, there's definitely a decent reason to assume that something more is happening here. And in this case, just saying that you're overcommitted and you're stepping away from a project is perhaps the more subtle or quieter way of leaving, instead of, you know, the way we've seen a lot of people leave jobs where they're claiming that they're being abused and sexually harassed, and unfortunately a lot of those claims turn out to be pretty valid to believe in. But then there also have been some pretty ridiculous cancel culture type stuff, situations too, where somebody is just mad at somebody. Yeah. It used to be the case that you don't mudsling unless you're in politics, and arguably it really should be even in politics that you shouldn't mudsling, because anytime you're throwing mud, you're getting mud on your hands too. It follows you around. It is going to be a factor in whether people in the future want to work with you or not. Even if you are 100% the victim, there's reasons certainly to keep things quiet, and if there was some kind of harassment or something going on, file your legal proceedings and do that in the court system, not the court of the public opinion. court of public opinion. Alright, that brings us to Gematsu articles, although it does look like we may still have my macros jumping around all over the place, so I may get back to some Video Games Chronicle articles. Let's see. Monochrome roguelike platformer Yeti adds a PS4 and 5, Xbox One and Series and Switch versions. Yeah. I'd assume it's Yeti. Well, that reminds me. There's the thing about that TV show Extinct that a couple things they made wrong in the first couple episodes. It only has 10 episodes, so it probably was going to do a couple more episodes to have a sequel season that it got canceled before that got greenlit. But yeah, they start with all the characters wearing very boring all black outfits, which is a mistake for just the fashion of it. And eventually they do have the people wear different outfits. But they also introduce a gun that basically shoots a poison dart, and they get rid of that very quickly because they didn't want this to be a gun series, and so they instead focus on these electric staffs for the few times that they actually do show hand-to-hand combat, and they are staffs that very much look like they are taken directly from Stargate SG-1 props. Yeah. But yeah, it really wouldn't have made sense in the world they had created that there would be guns. So this is a platformer shooter game, I think. I'll put it on the follow list. Then we have Moto MXGP 26 official of the game coming out in October. You know what? Without an actual release date, it kind of doesn't need to be on the follow list. But then that does certainly open up a question in my mind as far as should I be making YouTube shorts for things that don't have actual release dates listed. At the moment, I think I'll say yes, but in the future, if it starts to feel like there's too many YouTube shorts being made, the answer would be no. Although, when I was doing YouTube shorts before, and all of this really centers around the assumption that I'm even going to do YouTube shorts in the future at all. But when I was doing it before, it was very much struggling to get even 3 shorts to play per day because I had so many. Now that we're getting rid of AI, now that we're curating a lot better, it might be that there is only 1 or 2 shorts per day anyways. So at that point, I may struggle to want more, although I don't know what the set amount is anyways. The Gematsu article is MXGP 26, the official game, has been announced for PS5, Xbox Series, and PC. It is interesting that we still are having things labeled as the official game, although in this case it might make a lot of sense because there is going to be a lot of things with motocross, which is what I assume MX stands for, motocross, Grand Parade. I think it's Grand Prix. Yeah. Let's see. Neosphere of the Deep Blue Sky Legacy has been announced for Switch and PC. This feels like this would have been an older game. Yeah, it is. It's from 2005 and it was ported to the PS2 and PSP. Again, some of these thumbnails can be pretty deceptive. And I don't think this is actually on Steam. So, yeah, it's coming to Steam, but it would have been PC in Japan on some other launcher. This week's Japanese game releases: Splatoon Raiders, The Angel Next Door Spoils Me Rotten, Memorial Vacation, and more. That's all one title here. Yeah, so yeah, you have the pretty unique in Splatoon art style, and then you have a visual novel, basically. It's not going to be a big week, it seems, for new releases, at least in physical form, which we may very well be hitting a point where that is just going to be the case always. And see, now we are back to a Video Games Chronicle article for no explainable reason. Call of Duty movie will take place in the Modern Warfare universe. Paramount Films is set for release in the summer of 2028. I have no idea what you can do with a military-based game being turned into a movie. In a weird way, it might just revolutionize military movies in the sense that the old kinds of military movies are going to be seen as less desirable, and all military movies are going to just have this expectation of there being a lot more fiction in it, a lot more sci-fi in it, a lot more technology, very possibly a lot less focus on devastation to soldiers doing horrific things or the horrors that soldiers often do. It would be interesting for somebody else who likes military movies to compare the Call of Duty movie when it comes out to something like Platoon or Patton or any of those kind of famous, really big military movies. But yeah, I am still struggling personally to watch video game related movies and TV shows, and still the vast majority of them are unappealing and garbage. We did also hear that I'll put this on the follow list. The actor in the TV show for God of War was injured and is being replaced. Here's the Final Fantasy X 25th anniversary trailer, which is to say Final Fantasy X came out 25 years ago. Yeah. And we're going to really struggle once we start to have games that are 30, 40 years old. I think we're even struggling now. As somebody who is older now as a gamer, there definitely are a lot of gamers out there who just have not experienced and just don't know 4th generation, 5th generation video game stuff at all. I personally don't know 1st, 2nd generation video game stuff at all. Movie wise, it's I think even worse in that I've seen a lot of old movies, but not that old of movies. Like, I just bought My Fair Lady because it was on sale, and it's very questionable whether I should have bought it, because I'm very likely I'm never going to sit down and actually watch it. And certainly I haven't sat through any, like, Casablanca, Ben-Hur, things that are supposedly huge classics, but also way too long and way too boring. Gone with the Wind, for instance. And that's one of the things that if I ever do get my movie group up and going, I would hope that there might be some people there that would push me to watch things I wouldn't actually sit through and watch. Although, as far as the gamer group meetup that I've been attending, well, it has been occurring to me that they probably should, since they are not getting enough people, in my opinion, they probably should move from meeting up in a bar to meeting up somewhere where younger teenagers can show up. And that you're just going to have to bite that bullet and have 16-year-olds plus. That's the age limit, I would say, is like, this is a 16-year-old plus event, alcohol may be present at the place. Maybe not have alcohol at the place. But yeah, I think even for the gamer group meetup that I'm going to, the people that are showing up tend to be a little bit too old for the amount of numbers you would really want. Anyways, that's a side ramble. Moving on, the next Komatsu article says Wuthering Waves Elysium animated series has been announced. I don't off the top of my head know what Wuthering Waves is, so let's do the triple playthrough here and we'll see what the trailers look like in different languages. I've got the delay fairly off here. If it's Elysium, that would mean that the characters are already dead. The Elysium fields are the Greek equivalent, I think, of heaven. So yeah, we're seeing a couple of anime girls with extreme face close-ups. And that's all it's really showing us. Each of those trailers visually look to be the same. So that still really doesn't tell me too much about what the game itself is. Looks like this game may have a release date now. Need the Sky game being shown. Fading Echo. Let's see. Bleach Mirrors High introduces combat customization and 3 new characters. Meet Neru, Jurina, Hiro Hondo, and Maiko Tokishima, which I would have to assume, well, here's the problem. I'm seeing a picture and I don't recognize this character and I don't recognize these characters, and all of these other characters are from the Bleach anime, so yeah. Never even heard of this mobile game. Let's just watch one. Though, that's an interesting thing. Can Content ID really capture things twice? And I bet it can. I bet if I played 2 things and Content ID wanted to claim it, it would just catch it twice in a weird situation. Alright, so we are right on the verge, as I understand it, of the final bit of Bleach, remaking the final bit of the Bleach manga, replacing the final bit of the original Bleach TV series. So I assume that's why a mobile game like this would really exist, is that there's just a lot of hype and excitement. But I certainly don't think that this is going to really be important Bleach content that you have to ingest. And like most mobile games, it almost certainly is going to be shut down in 3 to 6 years to disappear forever. The 3 characters they're showing there definitely feel like they are very much fan service characters, which, in fairness, almost all the new characters added to Bleach are just fan service characters that are desperately trying to create somebody new and somebody interesting, Um, but yeah, in retrospect, that only really makes a lot of sense if it is just going to be a Monster of the Week series, which Bleach stopped being a Monster of the Week series fairly quickly in their setup. But yeah, here you have the stereotypical cute little sister. Then you have the lewd, bikini clad bombshell. Then they threw in the aloof of the older brother archetype, I think, too. It would be interesting, I suppose, if somebody did a deep dive to compare where Bleach as a series became this more linear story with a final boss, particularly in the 1,000 Years Blood War arc, compared to Dragon Ball, which has done, I think, a much better job of having just one big boss per season, maybe per series, but not being wholly centered around that. Although, in fairness, what Dragon Ball was compared to what Dragon Ball Z is still that shift. Dragon Ball very much was a conflict of a week, not even a monster of a week, compared to Dragon Ball Z, where you're fighting Frieza for an entire season, basically. Yeah. Inherently, one of the problems with manga and anime, and it is definitely done, I think, more in manga and anime than other kinds of TV series, but it's also done in other kinds of TV series, is that you have the hook, particularly in manga, for the first 2 or 3 issues to keep people hooked, and then you need to keep people going forever. So the premise of a story gets corrupted quite a bit, and what you're doing in episode 6 of a manga is, or issue 6 of a manga, is fairly disconnected from what you're doing in issue 1 or 2. Yeah, notably Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a great example of that, in that you're starting off just trying to get your grandfather's cards back, and there are entire arcs after that, and that you're doing major tournament arcs, playing Yu-Gi-Oh! For the Millennium items. Seems like people are pretty happy with Assassin's Creed Black Flag Resynced, despite a little bit of controversy here and there. They do seem like they've mostly avoided any major controversies, and this may very well be just the case that PlayStation getting rid of discs is still so forefront of people's minds that they don't have enough attention span to also be upset with microtransactions in Assassin's Creed Black Flag, or just fairly completely removing all the future story content. Assassin's Creed Black Flag Resynced sales have topped 3 million. This may also be a great example of where even if there is reasons to boycott things, even if there is an organized boycott of things, there's still plenty of people who will know nothing about that, or will ignore that and still buy a game. Honestly, I think you could make a game like Assassin's Creed Black Flag Resynced, come and release it, and the week before, the CEO could call everybody who buys the game an idiot and just insults them to their face, and there still would be a couple million people who would buy the games and not even know about them being directly insulted. And then we had this announcement that was almost certainly pushed either by Todd Howard trying to reassert his control over Bethesda game studios, or by Asha Sharma, the CEO of Xbox, trying to establish some confidence, in which they announced a roadmap that said basically nothing that we hadn't already known or leaked. People had been talking about. Yeah, the most interesting thing really was just that they were still supporting Fallout Shelter, because that could have been the thing that they would have quietly stopped doing anything with. And we don't really have any details on like Fallout 5 or Fallout 3, Fallout New Vegas remasters. No real details on Elder Scrolls 6. We kind of know Elder Scrolls Online is going to become nothing in the future. I still wouldn't be surprised if a lot of work and content from Elder Scrolls Online gets put into Elder Scrolls 6, and Elder Scrolls 6 is just not impressively better than what was in Elder Scrolls Online. And they may very well try to shut down Elder Scrolls Online just so people can't make that direct comparison. And apparently we don't have any Gaming on Linux articles in that order. Is that believable? No. I also noticed that we also didn't have a lot of those tabs opened. So this might be a weird stream. May have to do something very strange here. But first, let's go through the GameDeveloper.com articles. Netflix says its critically panned FIFA World Cup video game was a top-tier performer. The streamer said the soccer sim delivered one of its most successful cloud game debuts after launching on June 11th. Which, yeah, if you're already paying for the service, people may very well check something out. And that may be all they really care about. I have heard that Netflix has like 2 CEOs and they recently raised their price, and a lot of the shows are just not really that impressive. Slick Deals has been doing these giveaways, and one of their giveaways, I think for today, was a $250 gift card to Netflix, which, heck, if I won it, I guess I would reactivate my Netflix and see what I could stream for that amount of time. But I wouldn't be surprised if I actually struggled to find anything there that interested me. Let's see. 2/3 of the remaining Doom 2016 devs have been laid off during the latest rounds of Xbox cuts. Quote, I've been a gamer my whole life. If you cut a stat in half, everyone would call that nerfed. I don't know if you really need to try and talk like the cool kids when you're getting laid off. I wouldn't put a lot of hope to think that there's going to be a new Doom game that is anywhere as impactful or good as Doom 2016 was. In fairness, Doom as a series has always been kind of Doom 1, and then Doom 2 is slightly worse than Doom 1, but still very good. And then everything after that, Doom 3, Doom 4, Doom 4 being remade, were pretty much forgettable releases. Yeah. But yeah, it certainly, I think, highlights that it is just easier to lay off people in Texas, and they were a target. Even if it isn't the case that it's easier to lay off people in Texas that isn't a particularly pro-union state, there are some other factors that would lead towards people in Texas getting laid off versus people in Redmond, Washington getting laid off. The managers don't like getting on planes. That costs money. It takes up their time, and it's just not a fun experience. Even if you're flying first class, even if you're flying first class in a private jet, it's still not something that they like to do. So there is a real argument that companies should have all of their employees in the same city, if not at least state, that they are in. And maybe there's an argument that statewide, the 50 states of the United States should break up all companies into 50 smaller companies. That would be a very interesting way for things to do. There's also the case that something like id Software probably came to the union a lot slower being in Texas than unionization may have happened elsewhere. And if not slower, they just wouldn't have that many other union members from other companies in the same state. So if there is a protest in Texas, it might be a picket line of 5 people, where if there's a picket line in Redmond, Washington, it might be a picket line of 400 people. So management certainly might look at that and say, hey, that's a reason too. In the long run, all I can really say here is that I hope these people can get more work and form a new job and do something different. I don't think Doom, even being as iconic as it is, really is that necessary. They certainly could make a boomer shooter game of a completely different style, and it would work very well. Although I do question if they aren't just going to be stuck, because they're going to have to learn some other engine other than the id-Tech engine, which I keep saying the id-Tech engine, but they may actually no longer use the id-Tech engine, or they may have renamed the id-Tech engine at this point. It'd be really interesting if all this devs went and added a whole bunch of first-person shooter code to Godot and established a premier showcase game for first-person shooting in Godot, because Godot has yet to have a big enough project in 3D first-person shooting. I think it can do it, and it's open source, so it certainly can be tweaked to do it. But the vast majority of people who are moving over to Godot were experienced only in making 2D Unity style games, not Unreal Engine first-person shooting games. And for them, it might very well be better for them to learn their Unreal Engine than try and improve Godot, at least in the short run. But yeah, there's not a lot of hope that id-Tech itself would spin off and be freed and be able to rehire all these employees. So it certainly isn't good news by any means. And the layoffs continue as ZA/UM Studios lay off 32 workers 2 months after the release of Zero Parades for Dead Spies, which in fairness I hadn't even remembered that had come out, so that is a problem there. I'm not sure where ZA/UM is as far as where they are located. Yeah, they're not really telling you a location of their offices. I would have kind of assumed that they were a Japanese company, but who knows? Then GameDeveloper.com says Todd Howard says, quote, "The timing is right for a collaboration with Obsidian." Fallout franchise director Todd Howard confirms a new Fallout game is in the works with sister studio Obsidian Entertainment. I think this is again a case where Todd Howard is asserting that it was his decision, when I think it's very likely it wasn't his decision at all. Yeah. See, there would be where we would look at all new games on Steam, and this is going to be the point where I think the weirdness for today's stream may come into play. just might work particularly well in that, like I do any follow list cleanup. Yeah, so none of the games opened up for Steam, and none of the games for gaming on Linux opened up. Okay, so first thing I will do is open all of the articles that look like they might be new for gaming on Linux. Just in this case, I'm just gonna open up everything on page 1, and then we'll see if there's anything that looks like it's new on page 2. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to start opening all the new games on Steam, and then I'm going to take a bathroom break and let them run. And by the time we've gone through all the new games on Gaming on Linux articles, then 5 minutes will have occurred, and anything with AI will have auto closed. Right. I'm going to generally assume we've talked about all of these. PS3 emulator, 75% of all games now playable. Still pretty exciting news. That opened a lot of stuff. And it is weirdly just like, even now when tabs are opening, they are opening in weird ways. And I think that is probably a Firefox issue. Right, so I'm just gonna take about 50. Let's go down to downsizing. And let's see, today's the 20th. So if we go back to about the 17th or 18th. That should be everything. This really goes to show that there is still a real need for me to replace the news stories. The hope, there's no real guarantee, but the hope is that when this is all said and done, when I do get my macros replaced with just about monkey scripts, then it will be rock solid and not break like this. And it should be, because there's just a massive amount of extra stuff that UI Vision macros are doing that developed monkey scripts won't really need to do. So each individual line of code, each command is reduced, thus the complexity is reduced, thus the odds of something going wrong is reduced. You can kind of see how the right clicking here doesn't help and it doesn't always work. It definitely also feels like, I think we did tactical roulette. Can't remember though. I'm just going to go all the way back to 16. No, we did that. Right. This Class of '09 Puzzle Showdown, I definitely remember. So yeah, there is a ton of tabs now opening, and that'll take a while. So now is the right time to take a break. So I'll be back in just a few minutes. Okay, I'm back. So that worked out fairly well, I think. Or hopefully it will. So let's go through the gaming on Linux things, although, in fairness, a lot of these gaming on Linux things may also just be games that came out on Steam that are in the random order. It does just kind of feel like things are randomly opening in no real order even now, and I don't think it has anything to do with anything I'm doing with the Violent Monkey scripts. Yeah, I think it has more to do with just the latest updated version of Firefox, because it does seem like Firefox has a weirdness, to say the least. So, yeah, I'm still uncertain about as far as no release date, make a YouTube short on it. The answer probably is yes, make a YouTube short on it, but no, don't put it on the follow list. Open up the realm of there being a decent amount of YouTube shorts that promote games that never actually come out. I think is the better balance there. Clearly some of these games are not new. So I'd have to assume some of this is through some kind of humble bundle thing. The Mafia game series is decent enough to consider buying, even though I don't think I'd actually cover them. And then a lot of things still in early access. That is one of the things I am noticing in particular as far as how early access tends to play out on Steam, is that while by far Steam is being overrun with people using AI and disclosing that they're using AI, the previous major problem of just things being in early access forever and never leaving early access and really abusing what early access means to just avoid anybody holding it accountable is still very prominent. This is interesting that this is the first time since implementing the first visited local storage cookie I've seen BioShock Infinite. But that's not particularly surprising either, in that very rarely do I end up going back and looking at a game from 2013, particularly one I've already owned and played. And I assume I played that for my channel, but at this point I would have a real hard time remembering what I've played for my channel as far as footage versus what I haven't played. And certainly there are a lot of games that I wanted to play, but I haven't gotten around to it. So Gaming on Linux says the explosive isometric insurgent simulator Brigadoor Killers arrives in August. Valve says Team Fortress 2 MVM update is still coming and they're still working on it. They race down the mountain in a ridiculous looking shooter called Diathlon, I suppose is how you pronounce that. DayZ Badlands get a fresher teaser and is set to launch in October. These are all things we talked about before. Let's see, Calabria announces a preview of HoloCore and Arch 64 port of Arch Linux for Steam Frame. So this is a different operating system as far as I can tell, specifically ported to a Arch 64, which I assume is a chipset, ARM Arch 64, or maybe it's not chipset, maybe it's a port of Arch Linux. I don't know how many people are going to be that nerdy though, like, because you certainly are asking quite a lot there for somebody to have a Steam frame which isn't even out yet, and then be willing to try and install an entirely different operating system versus SteamOS, which doesn't make a lot of sense to me, because I would think a Steam frame very much is going to be what consoles were in the old days, with their own unique architectures, own unique hardware, own unique firmware, compared to what Xbox and PlayStation are nowadays, which are just basically computers. I would definitely expect there to be a lot more coverage and deep dives in how SteamOS works on the Steam frame first, before you start installing other operating systems to see if there's anything different there. And I would almost certainly assume that SteamOS for the Steam frame is just going to boot into a desktop mode that is exactly the same desktop mode that is on the Steam machine and the Steam Deck, the KDE Plasma desktop mode, with almost the exact same settings and everything. They would, I would think, want to keep a consistency there, and I think people would want to keep a consistency there. It is kind of a shame that there isn't a super easy way to synchronize your desktop modes between, say, a Steam machine and a Steam Deck out of the box, but I think we'll pretty quickly start to see a way in which that does happen. I also know there's at least one project out there to help translate a existing Windows install settings and files over to KDE SteamOS type desktops, Linuxes. Moving on, DXVK 3.0.2 brings bug fixes for Dying Light the Beast, Halo, more and more on Linux SteamOS, which Halo is, yeah. That is a embarrassing thing to mispronounce, certainly. I guess maybe I was thinking Hollow as in like Hollow Night Live? What is it? Hollow Live? Yep. Moving on, D7VK 2.0 was released with more performance fixes for Retro Direct 3D games on Linux. Yeah. I guess it is an interesting question to ask. Are we going to eventually start to feel like we're having diminishing returns as far as older games being supported on Linux? Or are we nowhere close to that? Like, I suppose the answer is yes, eventually, but we don't know how long that eventually is. I still would imagine there are thousands upon thousands of games that are really rare and really unknown that may not play well on SteamOS or Linux. And so there probably could be a floodgate of games that people are just not really thinking about and don't really remember that well, that might play really, really good with a few more tweaks and improvements. But even that may very well still be diminishing returns, because if the games are so rare that nobody remembers them, they just aren't in that high level demand of people really wanting to play them. Yeah. We have certainly hit a point, I think, with nostalgia too, where things that people are nostalgic for are only 20 or 30 years old, not 40 or 50 years old. Even the Tex Murphy Under the Killing Moon remaster Kickstarter project seems a little old. I wouldn't be surprised if it doesn't actually get funded. Of course, it seems like the Guild is doing a Kickstarter for a movie with Felicia Day, and so it might very well be that even somewhat newer stuff is now considered retro because it's just been so long. Or there isn't really a ton of new stuff to replace it. Moving on, Armor Cold War Assault Remastered is now out in full and open source. Interesting. A retro vehicle combat game, Fumes, adds co-op support as many friends as you can handle. For as many friends as you can handle, it says. I imagine there would be a limitation there in that the maximum number of connections on a network is probably limited to 65,525 connections, and you'd almost certainly run into problems well before that happened. Nope. Yeah, they're saying actually it can only go up to 250, which, yeah, that is a more reasonable number of people you could co-op and connect it to, but at max reality, 1 to 6 players is what they're suggesting, which even that is actually a hugely optimistic assumption, is that your average player of any game is going to even have one friend, let alone 6 friends playing with them. Moving on, Gaming Online says Valve expects component prices to continue getting worse. If you were hoping prices anywhere to come down soon, Valve has some bad news for you. It's likely only going to get worse. Although in fairness, with them selling the Steam machine so high, that's kind of what you would expect them to say. But there is also stories I hear of the RAM manufacturers saying for the next 5 years RAM is not going to get any cheaper than this, which sounds to me like collusion and profiteering, but who knows in those Asian countries if those things are even actually illegal. But yeah, there is still a decent argument for me to actually buy the Steam machine once I get that email, just because it would be easier to have one more computer pre-built instead of me having to try and build one myself, which I've failed miserably at actually doing that. That is something I am starting to put some thought back into doing that and finishing that up. That way I can have a computer just run for electricity use reasons once the winter hits. Nice little space heater in computer form. Moving on, the Faugus is how I'm going to pronounce it. Launcher 2.0 rolls out with a new UI and many enhancements. The idea of the Faugus launcher is to provide a reasonably simple game manager for Linux as an alternative to Lutris and Heroic. I'm not sure if people really want that though, and that kind of feels like what you would say on a project when you are just starting the project and you haven't even really thought of feature creep and things like that. Yeah, looking at this user interface, this feels lackluster, to say the least, as far as, sure, you're showing me art probably from Steam of the games, but you're not really showing it in a very pretty way. I don't have a nice like background, and there isn't really a nice interface. Yeah, it feels to me like if you wanted a simple launcher for games, you would just have a shortcut of those games in your start menu at that point, which would be even more simple. Yeah, I want a little bit more. Basically what I want is Emulation Station, which emulation station, with its ability to scrape data and have little trailer videos play and tell you what all kinds of information as far as when a ROM was made, or when the game for that ROM was made, when it was last played, of what the designer, the manufacturer, the publisher was. All of that information just really takes what otherwise would just be a line of text into something very pretty, very informative, slightly educational, and yeah, it definitely has a lot of themes and a lot of nice stuff. Let's see, and I guess for comparison, let's see if we can find some pictures of an emulation station themes, just to kind of compare. So yeah, here's a vertical system selection theme where they're showing off a Neo Geo system with several games. That's usually not the best thing, and they do seem to be going more virtual. This is the theme I like the best, the cartoony theme. And there's a whole bunch of themes built in, and then there's a whole bunch of themes that you can download, and you can certainly modify and make your own themes too. But yeah, here's an actual game selection point, though, as far as launching the game, and that's what I really want to focus on. Is so you've got the Super Mario World game selected here, and over here you're just scrolling up and down what is the line of text, and that would be the most simplistic way to launch these. And with this theme, all of the extra information that you scraped here is a rating that usually I think is for you to put in, and not something that the fandom puts in, but you might be able to scrape that. The release date, the developer, the publisher, the genre, the number of players, the last time you played, the number of times you played, and then a full-on description that usually is just copied from the Wikipedia / maybe the manuals, which it's not easy to get to it, but usually if you hit the option buttons, you could have a manual in a PDF form also for each game if you felt the need, although most places where you're going to get a ROM are not going to include scans of the manuals, so that is one room for preservation improvement there. And in this theme in particular, it's just showing you the box art, but there is definitely a case where you can have videos play. Here's an example of a different way of presenting all of that, and this is straight up a video playing, and then the box art is over here. And yeah, in this case things are a bit squeezed down. And that kind of theming is probably a good example of what you should have built into any plans. Here we have an LCARS Star Trek theme, which people who like Star Trek loves LCARS, but actually it's not a very good user interface. It's a sci-fi presentation of what they thought might be a good user interface, and I suppose you might argue that LCARS might make a lot of sense for different aliens with different kinds of fingers and appendages, but yeah, for humans Here you have a different way of presenting things, like they are posters on the wall, which is an interesting twist, I would say, as far as what things, how you would present things. And I really do need to figure out what the deal with Batocera is versus Emulation Station, whether it is just a case that Emulation Station is dead, or they changed the name, or there was just a fork there. But yeah, when you install EmuDeck on a Steam Deck, it installed Emulation Station Desktop Edition as its thing. Right, let's not stay off topic that much. So the next Gaming on Linux article was Get Some Quality Games in the 2K Mega Hits 2026 Humble Bundle. So £13.44 to get all of these games, and certainly that would explain why there would be all of those games opened. To the left is not explained as to why the tabs opened before that page, but whatever. Yeah, it's almost certainly a race condition where if I have one page is opening up a bunch of tabs and then another page decides to open a tab at the same time, that next tab to be opened must just lose its positioning completely. Or maybe it's not so much that it's losing its position, just that its position is changing and not updating. Might be the case too. This isn't the worst bundle if I wasn't spending so much money on other things like a new dryer, which, by the way, now that I've done all my laundry, I probably won't use the new dryer for at least another week. So, I mean, it's not something you can get a massive amount of use out of unless I was doing something really crazy with it. But yeah, there's an argument to buying that, even though I own a lot of those games, just to get the ones I don't own for relatively cheap. Robot Rhapsody is a cyberpunk odyssey of techno cults, rebels, and robotic bards. That is one interesting thing about Steam versus other sites. Like, it does feel like other sites in particular would try to lock you into buying things directly from their site. Yeah, you definitely can't buy something off of Amazon.com and then get a code to redeem that product through Amazon.com. Whereas you totally can buy something from HumbleBundle.com and get a key to redeem it on Steam. Which that fact alone really points out that if any company should be targeted for monopolies, it should be Amazon.com before Steam. Let's see. The Jagex launcher Linux beta has been released for old school RuneScape. Okay. I don't know how many people really want to go back and play old school RuneScape, but maybe there still is an audience. Honestly, this feels like old school RuneScape was called old school RuneScape probably 10 or 20 years ago, so it was old school even then. Let's see, here we have Arma Cold War Assault Remastered from 2021. It's just a military game. That's why it's not on my wish list. I think I am probably done with Borderlands as a series at this point. My determination not to just play Borderlands games just because I played the first couple, I think is pretty locked down at this point. I'm not sure I even played Borderlands 3. And I think I may own that game, so I may very well play that one, but then anything that I don't own is not going to be on priority to buy anything. And yeah, with summer ending, the kid I gave a Steam Deck to probably was only able to play one game in all of summer, although it is a super long JRPG game. So with that amount of time that he has to play games, there's just no real reason to buy games for kids at this point. Let's see, Minecraft 26.3 Snapshot 4 brings SDL3 and prefers Wayland on Linux. I think we had already talked about this. We may very well have hit a point where we've talked about everything. And I just opened a bunch of extra things. This is another one of those cases where if I was buying games for other people, the Homeworld Remastered Collection here would be on the wish list, but it doesn't really interest me. I'm noticing that my mouse does seem to not want to move as well as it once did, and I'm wondering if the battery might be low, or if I've just dropped the mouse enough times now that it's running into problems. They could just be my computer also slowing down because the air conditioner is kicking on, even could be a reason. Steam VR beta gets a big update ahead of the Steam Frame release. But yeah, we talked about that. Yeah, I'm pretty sure we talked about all of these. Pararoma is an incremental horror game about isolation, and it looks great. Let's watch this trailer. So yeah, it looks like it's more than just isolation. It looks like it's isolation and slobbish hoarding. And yeah, I don't think it's anything I would want to play. It definitely seems like you're going crazy. I don't know if I talked about it, but yeah, they did just ban virtual boyfriends and girlfriends in China, or they put severe limitations on it. So I wouldn't be surprised if something like that happens in most countries, and a lot of really isolated people just become further isolated without really getting any hope. Noticeably, the governments aren't doing any kind of meet and greets slash speed dating type programs or anything like that, which I will say in the United States, yeah, there isn't anything really like that too. You have local libraries and they do all kinds of events, but they are never really designed to target younger people who might be looking to date or meet people. It's usually events for either really young kids before the age in which people in the United States would think would be acceptable to date, or really old people who share some kind of activity, whether it's doing puzzles or reading books or you know, quilting, things like that. But you know, the singles night concept, or ladies night concept, which actually ladies night tends not to really even encourage developing relationships then, unless it's a lesbian bar, don't really exist in public libraries or any kind of community centers or anything run by the government, and they certainly tend not to really exist in churches, which churches often do a lot of social things, enough that the government doesn't try to do them themselves. I don't think they do them particularly well, and I honestly don't think they do them very often anyways, but they pretend like they do a lot of social activities. But yeah, there's really no support there other than dating sites and apps that are full of scammers and trying to charge profit off of you in such a way that they don't want you to actually delete the app and have a successful relationship. I am really off topic now. Bethesda's roadmap, we've already talked about, so we can just skip that. Then that should bring us to all the new games on Steam, and we probably have opened more than enough games on Steam. So at this rate, there is a decent chance that we will be done in just about 30 minutes if a couple things happen. One, when I close the tab, it actually takes me to the tab on the right instead of just taking me back to that, which it's not going to do. So let's see if maybe we can start on the other side and see what that does. What is going on? So when I close that, it's just going to take me back. What's funny is that's two tabs to the left. The one tab to the left would be a new tab. So yeah, we're going to potentially have an issue there. Well, that moved it to the right, so maybe that fixed it. A lot of these games it looks like we've already looked at. Yeah, let's see. It does look like so far I really haven't seen anything amazing. Alright, so this is going to take forever just because of going to the right. Suppose the question here is, what if I was to hit Control Tab this way? And see what happens there. Walking simulator game. I think that would still be a no. Didn't help at all. Alright, so what we got to do is close this tab. That's the next thing to do. Just closing that tab means we can't jump back to that tab. It probably also implies the core issue in that when multiple tabs are opening, up at the same time. There seems to be a number that is getting saved inaccurately, wrongly. It feels to me like the tab IDs and tab numbers maybe need to be refreshed once no more tabs are opening. Yeah, and a lot of these games I think I've already looked at. Give that one a follow. Prologues are still somewhat of an issue, but they, I think, are really stopping from being an issue as they once were. It used to be that there was just a ton of games that would have prologues, and the prologues would just be demos, versus the idea of a prologue being a standalone bit of game that most of the time doesn't even matter and you really shouldn't bother to play, but you could play. Of course, the reality of the situation often is the case that the only time you would want to play a prologue would be after you've played the main game, which effectively means you really want to play a prequel, not a shorter bit of content. So yeah, I feel like I'm being somewhat generous today, but not too generous. Yeah. Yeah, that is. There's going to be that, really. I think we are just going to go through all these. Give that a chance. Go through all these games. I definitely feel like now, having looked through basically all the games that came out on Steam for a year or two, the idea of looking for a hidden gem is probably not an appropriate goal, and that the goal definitely feels like they should, it should change to a more manageable goal of finding things that are just aren't first-person shooter things. Now, this is an interesting game because it's supposed to be an educational, I think, game to teach you SQL queries, which I wouldn't say SQL queries are particularly hard by any means to do. In a lot of ways, it's just a more technical version of like Her Story, although the visuals here definitely leave a lot to be desired compared to Her Stories. And certainly when you start to talk about joins from SQL queries, those get rather difficult. And one of the things when I was messing with SQL in particular was the hardest thing was just password locking SQL databases and not corrupting SQL databases. So for my own interest and for educational reasons, I think I will put this on the follow list. Although, in this case, I'm going to just put it on the wish list. Now, SQL search query language is kind of a standard that what became the de facto standard from MySQL, which I think since has been defunct and replaced with MariaDB plus other SQL databases servers. But yeah, it seems like these virtual operating system games are somewhat becoming more popular. Maybe those are the new styles of hacking games. It's hacking old computer desktops, or just searching them, really. But yeah, the point I was making is SQL is not a programming language, so it doesn't inherently get beyond a certain point of extremeness. That's our first Jeffrey Epstein joke game I've seen, I think. But yeah, I don't think we'll see a lot of those because while he's a celebrity in his infamy and death, he was definitely not known in his life, and that is, I think, going to limit joke games about starring him. I'll give that a chance. Which in fairness is probably a good thing, because when you're talking about a, I mean, do we have to say alleged at this point? I guess he never had his day in court. When you talk about an alleged pedophile making video game starring an alleged pedophile is not going to get you very far. Butterfly game, there might be something to that. Give that horror game a chance. Yeah. Fog Piercer might be something. Oh, that was already on the fall list. Whoops. Let's put that back on the fall list. I'm glad I still have the Gesturify plugin, which in fairness, I'm not going to get rid of the Gesturify plugin. I don't think there would be an easy way to replace that extension with a BotMonkey script. It could be done, but it would be very difficult because I'd have to have basically a pattern recognition algorithm added to the code. It'd be thousands of lines of code potentially to recreate something that's already done. Not worth my time to try and recreate something that complicated, and probably wouldn't even save me anything much in performance. But yeah, the general thought still is to get rid of most of the extensions I have installed. And particularly since they're BotMonkey scripts, I can have them auto update via a GitHub, which means I can have them installed on multiple computers, update it, and have it update to all computers through the internet. Instead of having it all be in one place and one place only. Here we have another adult game that should be in the adult section, and thus not listed in that list. Yeah, if the goal is not to find hidden gems, but just to find decent small games, single A games, double A games, whatever double A even really should mean, is very much in question in my mind. I don't know a great way to coordinate the reality of the situation as far as what games we see with the desire there either. And furthermore, I really don't know how to integrate covering those kinds of games or even owning those kinds of games as a content creator. Yeah. That's like a tie game or something. Here you have something that clearly is taking some character designs from animes. I don't know if this is some kind of Spanish game. They say it's only in English, but it feels like this is a fan ROM or something. Yeah. You don't see a lot of that where it's straight up just fan ROM. We stole art assets completely. I did see a story of where somebody managed to get quite a few asset flip games with Trojan viruses on them onto Steam for a short time, and then the FBI caught them because they were using Uber food delivery on the same Windows install as they had been doing the hacking on, and Microsoft Windows admitted that there was a tracking identifier, spyware basically, tracker ID on all Windows installs. Which tells you two things. One, you shouldn't use Windows. And two, if you were going to use Windows for hacking, you would spin up a virtual machine that is a fresh install each time, and you would nuke that virtual machine each time. That still might not save you because it would have to be a fresh install each time, and still probably wouldn't help you too much. The bigger lesson to take from that is not hack things. And what really sucks about getting hacked through Steam is that they're not really even going for your Steam account. They're trying to find Bitcoin wallets and other things that would be on your same computer. So here's an interesting question on lewdness here, is that you've got a third-person perspective of these 3D CGI girls in bikinis, and obviously it's designed so you can see their backsides. But does this go that far from what you would see if you were legitimately trying to make a game where people are doing this kind of hand scuba? I don't know what these devices are called. These little propellers that would pull you along in the water. I don't know if they're even really available. I've seen them. I saw something like that on a James Bond movie decades ago, and I assume something like that may exist, but you know. I guess the question is there a different way you could present this? You could put it in first-person perspective, certainly, and that would cause a little bit more motion sickness. You definitely wouldn't call it just hydro chicks, and you definitely would have probably one character that's more focused. You could certainly, for modesty, add skirts, but how many people at the beach really have skirts? Or, yeah. This is one of those examples where the amount of skin showing is very acceptable, what you would expect at a water park / beach, but the angles and the presentations just in the screenshots alone definitely have that heteronormative male gaze built into it. So yeah, I really don't know how you would make that more acceptable if it absolutely had to be the character being drawn along in that way. Even when you do see similar higher quality games like that, they tend to have the characters standing up on like sci-fi surfboards or something. This Stratego might be a good translation of the game Stratego, which is what I assume that's what this is the board game Stratego just turned into video game form. Kind of feels like it's probably a mobile game first, and they've just added some extra art so it looks good in widescreen. Well, I'll give it a chance. Yeah. I'm gonna say no to that. These kinds of games definitely feel like they might be more mobile games and gacha games, and I think we are going to start to see more of these, and I am going to have to decide whether they deserve a follow or not. Suffice it to say, I probably have already put 40 games on the follow list, so if a follow list cleanup was to happen during the streams, which eventually the plan is to have them happen during the streams, 40 games being considered is going to be the bare minimum. It might be the case, though, that the follow list cleanup just never actually happens during the streams. Wouldn't be the worst thought, too. Yeah, now that I'm not having to run a macro after each stream, I could take a break after streaming and do a follow list cleanup or two afterwards. That is as likely to happen as me recording any other pre-recorded footage after streaming, depending on how excited I am about the game I'm currently playing, which obviously right now I'm basically not playing anything, so yeah. That one was already on the follow list. No, I guess it wasn't. I definitely do need to figure out how to accomplish more on the Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. It also has occurred to me that maybe I really am at a point now where it would just make more sense to pre-record the live streams and then put them out as a live premiere, effectively, instead of being actually live. Which there are a lot of content creators that do that. They put their videos out on Patreon first, and then months later they put what was a live stream out as a live stream on YouTube, which, yeah, that is something that YouTube really doesn't want you to do, but seems to be fairly common. Okay, well, unless I missed something big today, which I don't think I did, that is the actual end of the show. Again, I'm still thinking about how to do a better faultless cleanup and just improve this whole experience overall. But one of the ways to improve it, I definitely think, is to keep the streams shorter. And we only went 2.5 hours today. So that's going to be it for the stream. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and keep on watching. Thanks.